Hey folks, welcome back to our study of the Cold War. We're moving on with how President Kennedy dealt with Cold War issues during his short term as president, probably, arguably, the most famous president of our Cold War time period. So far we've talked about Truman, Eisenhower, and now on to Kennedy. We'll move back and forth between Eisenhower and Kennedy in this segment, but focus mostly on Kennedy. Kennedy's policy, foreign policy, in regards to Cold War was called flexible response. Unlike Eisenhower, who instituted a policy of brinkmanship and spent a lot of money on development of nuclear weapons and cut back on other parts of the military, such as Navy and the Air Force, Navy and the Army. Kennedy, in his flexible response, does continue to spend money on nuclear military, but also to build up other parts of the military as well. So bringing back the Army, bringing back the Navy, because flexible response is one in which we have the power to decide what weapons we need to use. Brinkmanship forces us to use nuclear weapons no matter what the issue. Flexible response allowed Kennedy to use other aspects of military power without going all-out nuclear war. The idea came from Robert McNamara, and you can see his quote here. One of the many aspects of this policy, we see the creation of the Special Forces Unit of the Army called the Green Berets. And again, just to show you that we're not cutting back on nuclear building at this time, it does triple the overall nuclear capabilities of the United States, but it also increases the size of our conventional military. Now, the first test of this policy is in Cuba. Fidel Castro, a revolutionary leader, takes over control, essentially assassinates his way to power, and once in power, he openly declared himself in line and welcomes aid from the Soviet Union. Now again, this takes place during Eisenhower's presidency. As a result of this move, Eisenhower cuts off diplomatic relations. You might notice that there was a little flash there. It kind of appears that Liam Neeson and Fidel Castro may be the same person. I doubt it. But Castro gains power because of the current dictator, Fulgencio Batista. When Castro comes to power, he promises democracy, like all dictators do. Hitler did it, Mussolini did it. So the movement, the Castro movement, the Castro Revolution, overthrows Batista, who was a friend of the United States. Now, we did not approve of the dictator-style policies that he ran Cuba with, but Batista was very friendly to U.S. economics and U.S. businessmen, especially, arguably, the mafia. A lot of casinos in Cuba that the mafia profited from. There's a great scene in Godfather 2 that shows the Batista regime being knocked over and Batista resigning, and everyone, all the Americans fleeing Cuba because of what was coming with Castro's takeover. Castro promises to remove poverty, inequality, and the dictatorship from Cuba, and he doesn't. He essentially institutes another dictatorship in Cuba once he gains power. U.S. is suspicious of this movement, but it recognizes the new government because Castro is promising democracy, and that would be better than a dictatorship. So the United States is recognizing the new government, but still suspicious. But almost immediately with Castro's takeover, the relationship between the two countries starts to deteriorate. As an example, Castro seizes the American and British oil refineries in Cuba and takes U.S.-owned sugar plantations, breaks them up into small communes, and gives them over to landless peasants to be worked. The American owners of the sugar plantations appeal to the United States for help, and the only help that we send is to enact a trade barrier against Cuban sugar. Again, Castro openly welcomes Soviet aid as ruler of Cuba, and the Soviet Union is more than happy to reply with assistance, especially to a country so close to U.S. borders. Cuba sits 90 miles south of Florida, and so the Soviet Union was very happy to help out a country such as this, because that puts him in a great strategic location for possible launch of military style attacks. Essentially, over time, Castro shows that he's nothing more than a tyrant who replaced one dictatorship with another. 10% of the Cuban population goes into exile, and they seek exile. They seek refuge in Florida and Miami, Florida today. Over 300,000, if not even more, Cuban peoples living there. They have a little enclave like we see in New York City. This one's called Little Havana. Guys, thanks a lot. Take care.